to their 5 minutes. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate what Senator Tuberville said, and Senator Duckworth just alluded to this, that it is very difficult for the veteran to get their records. And I think one of the things we should look at is who owns those records. It would be so much more helpful if the veteran himself controlled those records. If individually we owned our healthcare records, every one of us, and then that way you wouldn't have the problem that you're talking about, Ms. Mathis. The veteran would be in charge of their records and would be able to take it, whether they're in community care, whether they're in TRICARE, because we have seen just an inordinate amount of waste in trying to build the electronic health records, whether it is Cerner, Epic, Oracle. It is like they can't figure this out. In Nashville, Tennessee, we've got a lot of health IT innovators, so they can figure this out. And one way to do it is to let individuals, not the doctor, not the insurance company, not an agency, own their health care records. I also want to say I find it very sad that for many of our vets, Tunnel to Towers and Wounded Warrior are the people that can help them get help, because the VA can't figure out how to do their job. They're still working remote. They do not show up. It takes forever. That's why there are 956,000 claims in the queue and nearly 300,000 over 120 days, and veterans cannot get a response from these people. I know a lot of it is because of the union that is there at the VA that is stifling access to this care and benefits. And I find it just something that should not be tolerated, and it's frustrating to the veterans that we're trying to serve. And it's why community care is so vitally important. And Ms. Marg, thank you for speaking to that. Mr. Golnick, I want to come to you and thank you for your service. And thank you for what you're doing with Forge and trying to solve a problem, because the VA has thrown up barriers to health care. And you're trying to get around that and improve access. So I want you to give like a 1, 2, 3 point. What could this committee require the VA to do to improve that access?
Thank you, Senator. And just to be clear, I'm a co-founder of Forge. I've stepped down from full-time with them, so I'm representing myself. But
yes.
But I will say there are things, and to your point, Senator, I think there's a lot of friction points that are preventing veterans from getting access to care, especially when you're talking about mental health, right? I think what this committee could do is work with the VA to ensure that they're educating veterans, that the VA is educating veterans on what their options are. Number 2 would be the administrative side of this, ensure that the access standards are codified so people that within VA system know, okay, if X, then Y, right? I think that's as simple as that. And then I think ensuring that there's some oversight on certain VAs and certain VISNs in terms of that care making sure that care, the veteran is the true North Star. It's not what their local budget is. It's not anything else. Care of veterans should be the true North Star of all care decisions.
I agree with that, and putting the veteran at the center. That's why I've got this VA Healthcare Freedom Act that would remove those obstacles and really put the criteria in the Mission Act for eligibility for community care and give full choice to veterans in select regions. So let's roll this out as a pilot project and then put it on a 4-year path to fully implement it, so a veteran can go get what they need, when they need it, where they need it, show their VA card, and the VA gets the bill, not the veteran. And that would solve this and this enormous backlog that we have. Give the veteran the choice put them at the center of this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blackburn, thank you. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In answer to Senator Chobelville's questions, I think the beginning of this electronic medical records problem started with a no-bid contract about 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairman. Mr. Puerto, I am so sorry for your loss. I noted that you said your son had an ADHD diagnosis, and I was looking at figures last week from our TennCare, which is our Medicaid program in Tennessee, and there are over 400,000 children in our state of 7 million people that have an ADHD diagnosis. I know that we have so many times seen kids that to deal with the pain would try to get something, and my heart breaks for you. And I hope we take a deeper dive, and that if confirmed, that Robert F. Kennedy will take a deeper dive into how we medicate children and work on these issues. And thank you for the good work that you were doing. Ms. Noring, thank you for your support of KOSA. I appreciate that, and we share your heartbreak. I stepped out of committee to go speak to a group of children that are here for Wired Human and are working on this issue. And the work that you and other parents have done has encouraged these children to stand up and be a resource to their peers and to help them through this issue. So I thank you for that good work that you are doing. Sheriff Barnes, I want to talk with you about HIDA. I know that in 22, we had 134 criminal organizations that were dismantled by HIDA. We had over 8,700 kilograms of drugs that were removed nationally. And in Tennessee, our TBI director, Director Roush, every time he sees me, he says, we have to reauthorize HIDA because it is effective. And the Appalachia HIDA task force operating in Tennessee was responsible for moving $51 million street value of drugs off the market. So talk for a minute about why it is crucial that HIDA be reauthorized for law enforcement officers like you.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn, and thank you for the reauthorization of HIDA. It's very important, and Director Roush is a good friend.
He's a good man.
I will summarize it this way. At this time in our nation's history, the worst time of our narcotics trafficking and deaths, this is not the time to disenfranchise or divest from the HIDA program. HIDA programs are national. They rely on local law enforcement task forces and contributions. The HIDA funding doesn't really fully fund the HIDA programs. It offsets those contributions from locals. And right now, with our municipal agencies having hiring problems, they're stepping away from the HIDA programs. Keeping them staffed is very difficult. So that reauthorization is very critical to keep the glue together, to keep the HIDA programs running.
I have talked to, and I want to stay with you, Sheriff, talked to some of our law enforcement agencies, and they have talked about sanctuary city policies, and I know that Senator Lee brought this up with you, but it seems that in a sanctuary city to go after these traffickers, that it is more difficult, that sometimes you have to find workarounds. And I would love for you to talk for just a minute about what we can do that would help you all as you try to deal with these sanctuary cities to get these drugs off the street.
Senator, it's even worse for me in California because of Senate Bill 54 passed about 6 years ago that prohibits my dialogue with federal partners on immigration issues. I have the ability to turn our high-level offenders only to ICE. They don't always pick them up, which requires me to release them back in the communities in which they reoffend, oftentimes with the communities that they preyed upon. I'm a supporter of abolishing that SB 54 movement. We have to be able to cooperate with our federal partners, And I think if we hold these criminals accountable, this isn't about the general public. Those are entrusted to my care in my jail, and the safest environment to transfer them over to ICE's custody will keep our communities safe, especially those immigrant communities, from them returning to and preying upon them.
And, so many people will say when they get back out, when they evade law enforcement in these sanctuary cities, that they really return even more committed to abuse people in those communities where they have been trafficking those drugs, to pick up the pace of selling the drugs. And I look at these sanctuary city policies and I think how difficult it makes your job when you're trying to keep our community safe. And we thank you for the work that you're doing. We thank each of you for being here today. Senator Blumenthal and I are going to continue to push KOSA to get, as you said, Ms. Noring, that foundational law that will allow us to hold social media to account. Thank you all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two hearings and you're chairing the committee. This is, wow, it's amazing.
Thank you. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of you for being here. Mr. Gray, I want to come to you. Many of us have seen what China has done in Africa, around Djibouti, with the port that is there, and also in Latin America. And we have listened to Xi Jinping and the CCP leadership talk about the Polar Silk Road and putting this as a part of their Belt and Road initiative. So I'd like for you to talk about why it is important that we strengthen this bond with Greenland and pay more attention to this because of the impact of the CCP.
Senator, it's a great question. This is a playbook that the Chinese Communist Party run. They do it all over the world. I've seen it personally in the South Pacific. They do it in Latin America. They do it in Southeast Asia, in Sub-Saharan Africa. They start by, you could call it the Belt and Road Initiative, you can call it the Polar Silk Road, whatever terminology they want to use. But what it is predatory lending, primarily usurious interest rates for what we often call white elephant projects, projects that very often serve no economic purpose.
And don't last. And then they're stuck with debt diplomacy.
Exactly. And once they have the debt diplomacy, ma'am, the Chinese come in and use that as for coercive political control over small developing states that can't push back and don't have the ability to counter the CCP's malign influence. And what I'm so concerned about and why I think this topic is so critical is that something very similar we're beginning to see bits and pieces of this in the high north, in the Faroe Islands, in Greenland to some extent in recent years. We've seen it in Svalbard. We've seen it in Iceland. This is beginning to happen. The Chinese are signaling their intention to pursue this more actively, and that's why because we know the playbook, we need to be prepared to push back proactively.
Dr. Pincus, I want to come to you because I had seen a quote from Biden NSC Council Director Brennan, and he made a comment at a Wilson Center event in 22 that the U.S. has accepted that the China has a, and I'm quoting him, vested interest in the Arctic. I completely disagree with that because China, just because they're calling themselves a near Arctic neighbor, does not give them a vested interest. And I want you to talk a little bit about that type attitude with that perspective that China is using this for their security and endangering our national security.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. China has expressed its interests in the Arctic with an Arctic policy statement that came out in 2018, and they mention a host of interests that they have in the region. They talk about the emergent shipping lanes, they talk about natural resources, they talk about scientific data, and so those are their articulated interests in the region, and I think it's in terms of their economic interests, China is a resource importing country. There's a lot of resources in the Arctic region. It is not surprising that they would pursue those resources. Their pursuit of those resources is adverse to the interests of the United States.
Okay, Mr. Gray, I want to pivot to you on this, because China focuses on dual-use technologies. And of course, we don't know where the China Economic Development Department, MOFCOM, ends, pardon me, and their military begins. And this is what they couch as dual use. And I would like for you to give what you see as specific steps that we can take against the CCP in this regard to stop them from using this as a research and test site.
It's an incredibly important question, Senator. I think this is where my concerns about the current trajectory of the political relationship between Denmark and Greenland are so acute. We have to have a plan for this, the reason you outline, and for reasons of even more conventional military purposes. We have to have a plan for what comes next. And if we don't know what the 56,000 people in Nuuk, what their political organization looks like post-Copenhagen, which they say will happen, what you're describing is going to become even more prevalent. And we've seen this happen in places in the South Pacific that are similarly sized. We have to have a plan for what comes next.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of you for taking your time to be here today. Dr. Franks, we're here to talk about free speech, correct?
Yes.
And we're here to talk about that being a fundamental right guaranteed by the Constitution, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the Supreme Court plays an essential role in guaranteeing those constitutional rights, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I want to talk to you about a tweet that you had in January 2024. The Supreme Court is a death panel. Is that your opinion?
In the context of this hearing, I think it is important to emphasize why I am here, which is to talk about my views on the First Amendment.
No. That's not what I ask you. Do you think the Supreme Court is a death panel?
In the context of the cases that, not for free speech, no, that was not the context of that particular
Oh, my goodness. Okay. Well, it appears that you see the Supreme Court as a death panel, and that is some of the same rhetoric that, unfortunately, we continue to hear from some on the left who are trying to villainize justices who are doing their job. And I would like to just ask you, knowing that you have put this out, that the Supreme Court is a death panel, then let me ask you this. Do you look at Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, Jackson as members of the death panel, or is this just the justices that you disagree with?
I do not believe that the comments that you are referring to have relevance for this particular hearing, but here's what I will say. This is an administration that is threatening judges in addition to other people that he disagrees with. So, okay, yes, if your question is, do I defend judges? Am I worried about judges' security? I am. I am worried about this administration essentially threatening those judges.
I want to talk with you, Ms. Hemingway, about the State Department's use of the Global Engagement Center to censor news outlets like the Daily Wire and the Federalist. I know that this is something that you have had to deal with. And Daily Wire is located in Tennessee. We're proud of them. We are delighted that they chose to move from California over to Tennessee. And It is my understanding that the Global Engagement Center was created to counter messaging from bad actors, including terrorist groups, but the Biden administration weaponized it to silence conservative groups. And what has the censorship, I call it the censorship industrial complex, what do you think they're trying to hide when it targets outlets like the Federalist and the Daily Wire?
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Yes, our reporter, Margot Cleveland, who's our senior legal writer, uncovered through her reporting facets of the censorship industrial complex and learned that the State Department was one of the federal entities that was engaging with non-governmental organizations and other entities in big tech to market, promote, censorship tools and blacklists, which were then used against my publication, The Federalist, and also the Daily Wire. Publications that are a threat to the reigning orthodoxies are targeted by the censorship industrial complex. They want to exist without people pointing out their lies or the fact that there are really important debates. And so we are suing the State Department for that, and it is ongoing, this support of the censorship industrial complex. It is the bureaucracy, really, which perpetuates this even more than a particular administration.
Yes, and I think it's so important to note that robust, respectful, bipartisan debate adds to our freedom, helps to keep us free, and allows that debate in the public square. And when you have an entity that becomes weaponized and shuts down one side of that speech and only allows speech with which it completely agrees, that is when you have that censorship writ large. My time expires. Professor Turley, I have a question I will submit to you for the record. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you for being with us today. I'd like to start with you, Ms. Hemingway.
I'm worried about this administration essentially threatening those judges.
I want to talk with you, Ms. Hemingway, about the State Department's use of the Global Engagement Center to censor news outlets like the Daily Wire and the Federalist. I know that this is something that you have had to deal with. And Daily Wire is located in Tennessee. We're proud of them. We are delighted that they chose to move from California over to Tennessee. And it is my understanding that the Global Engagement Center was created to counter messaging from bad actors, including terrorist groups, but the Biden administration weaponized it to silence conservative groups. And what has the censorship, I call it the censorship industrial complex, what do you think they're trying to hide when it targets outlets like the Federalist and the Daily Wire?
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Yes, our reporter, Margot Cleveland, who's our senior legal writer, uncovered through her reporting facets of the censorship industrial complex and learned that the State Department was one of the federal entities that was engaging with non-governmental organizations and other entities in big tech to market, promote, censorship tools and blacklists, which were then used against my publication, The Federalist, and also the Daily Wire. Publications that are a threat to the reigning orthodoxies are targeted by the censorship industrial complex. They want to exist without people pointing out their lies or the fact that there are really important debates. And so we are suing the State Department for that, and it is ongoing, this support of the censorship industrial complex. It is the bureaucracy, really, which perpetuates this even more than a particular administration.
Yes, and I think it's so important to note that robust, respectful, bipartisan debate adds to our freedom, helps to keep us free, and allows that debate in the public square. And when you have an entity that becomes weaponized and shuts down one side of that speech and only allows speech with which it completely agrees, that is when you have that censorship writ large. My time expires. Professor Turley, I have a question I will submit to you for the record. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you for being with us today. I'd like to start with you, Ms. Hemingway.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today. I know you have had a busy week, and we appreciate that and appreciate what the President is trying to do for the broader economy. And of course, it is encouraging to hear that we have 70 countries that are coming in to negotiate tariffs and some of those non-tariff barriers that have existed. So we're grateful for all that work. I do want to ask you about some of the foreign governments using bogus environmental regulations to really sideline American businesses. And the EU's new deforestation regulation is a great example of this, imposing excessive reporting requirements that would shut out Tennessee pulp and paper producers from foreign markets. And also, we're seeing some of these foreign governments actually seize U.S. assets under false pretenses. And last year we had a company, Vulcan Materials, which declined to sell its Mexican port to the government. So armed forces came in and took control of that, citing environmental licensing requirements. And this is a pattern of regulatory abuse, and it keeps our companies out of the global market. So how are you working to protect these U.S. businesses and to deal with these foreign governments who are weaponizing their bogus regulations to restrict the market access?
Well, Senator, I always find it troubling when countries use these kind of measures as a protectionist measure. Our companies, whether they're making here and exporting or going elsewhere to produce in other countries, are always the cleanest and most responsible, always. And we should always have the best treatment under those kinds of regimes. So with respect to the two examples you noted on the Vulcan issue, I've raised this personally with Mexican trade officials. And with respect to the EU forestry regulation, my understanding is right now it's a little bit on pause while they themselves look at it and take a second look. And I talk to my counterparts in Europe frequently, and this is something where I want to make sure that they're treating us appropriately under this law, not discriminating against us.
That's wonderful. If I could get in writing from you an update on the Vulcan port issue, that would be helpful also.
We're happy to do that, Senator.
Thank you. I want to talk about digital trade because President Trump really has shown great leadership when it comes to digital trade. And that was a part of the negotiations on the USMCA. And it really gave us a very robust and ambitious digital trade chapter. And the provisions, including cross-border data flows and data localization, are critical to facilitating strategic U.S. initiatives across a broad range of industries. And we have an opportunity now to build on this digital chapter. So, and I think that could really pave a way to add other provisions on critical issues such as AI, such as quantum computing that we are dealing with. So how could you use this digital trade chapter that we have in the USMCA to expand that globally as we look at negotiating new trade agreements?
Well, I think it's important to understand that our companies, our digital trade companies, are the most competitive in the world. They're the most effective in the world. And what we don't want is a situation where they are retaliated against or they're discriminated against such that their Chinese competitors actually take up market share. I mean, that would be a disastrous situation. And so as countries come to us and want to talk about how to have more reciprocal trade or better trade actions, I would expect that we want to make sure that they're not discriminating against our technology companies. And we want to make sure we have a level playing field so we can have the appropriate market access that we want, and whether we do that in formal trade agreements or just in commitments from these other countries.
Well, and as you know, digital trade is important to Tennessee.
Yes, ma'am.
So we're looking forward to that. Non-tariff barriers are something that get mentioned quite a bit as we are talking to companies. I know Vietnam has several non-tariff barriers. And we've seen this in the USTR's National Trade Estimate report. And we had a record high deficit with Vietnam in 2024. And in part, that's because Chinese companies are using Vietnam to transship. So will you work to ensure that any possible deal with Vietnam, because I know they've been first to the table to try to negotiate for a zero tariff, but we want to make certain that whatever is done includes provisions that will not allow China to reap the benefits of working with and shipping through Vietnam.
I agree with you 100%, Senator, whether it's Vietnam or others. If they think they're going to have some kind of different rate, it can't be one that gives preference to a third country like China, where they can just take advantage of it or use it to circumvent what we're trying to do. I agree with you 100% on this point.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, we are delighted that you are here today, so thank you for your time. I do want to say I have been so impressed with the way that you have tackled the EHRM program and that rollout. You and I discussed this in our first meeting and in your confirmation hearing and when you were in Nashville, and thank you again for making the Nashville VA one of your first stops. And I know that you are planning to take the EHR program live, pardon me, in 13 additional facilities in 26. And I know previously we have had an issue with VA employees showing up for the training and then utilizing the system. So talk to me a little bit about how you're going to continue this rollout and then get the employees to actually use the system.
Well, I appreciate that, Senator. And I think one of the things is that we're looking at in this rollout, and I appreciate, and Senator Murray is no longer here, but we talked about this. This rollout is being done in a sense, what I found, when I found the system, basically the VA side of the house was sort of, we're not going to do anything and we're going to make it all individualized. And then you had Oracle side that was, saying we could just finish this in a short amount of time. So what we've done is we've actually now said, put the onus back on Oracle to actually, provide what they're supposed to provide. And we've also cut down on our side the amount of delay that was caused that really caused the initial problems in the rollout, where we had 6 different locations doing 6 different things. So we've taken 8 or 9 committees that were all having to touch stuff before they could get back to a decision and cut that down to 1 committee that then can communicate directly with Oracle to get this started. Dr. Lawrence, which I appreciate everybody on the dais who helped get him through, is our deputy. He is now in place to actually take care of and oversee that, and we're bringing in others right now, and I've committed to him to whatever help he needs to hire to bring in to make sure that our system is safe and useful for our clinicians, to make sure that they have that. And so far we've seen that actually occurring as we go forward. So I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, and then the employees that were instructed to go through the training, they've shown up and done the training?
As far as I know, Senator.
Okay,
yes.
That is great. And then let's see, how many employees have been released from the VA to date out of your totals?
Would this be out of the probationary firings? Is about 1,000.
About 1,000.
Yeah.
Okay, that is helpful. I want to ask you about the budget. The president's budget came out last week, and how do you view the resources that are in there for modernizing the VA? And can you give me some examples of how you're going to use these resources moving forward so that the VA is more responsive and in a more timely manner for our vets?
Yes, I think the budget that was presented by the president is actually one that it fulfills the commitment that we've talked about making sure our veterans are taken care of. And I think that's the big issue here when you look at the increases, and for all of the folks who've actually been saying and accusing us of, going to cut health care and cut benefits and cut all this, is just this. It doesn't add up when you look at the budget itself, which is has an increase either on base budget or also using TEF funds as well. So what we're looking at it is how do we then use that combined with the efficiencies we're finding, either through our contracts or through our employee base to make sure that we're putting more of those resources to our research, toward our clinical care, toward our front part. Also toward and I know this is a concern from yours, is also toward community care, is how we actually balance the two needs. So these are going to provide the resources we need. It also provides enough money to continue the ERHM, the health record management system too.
And then how do we shorten the time that it takes for approval to move into community care? I just left a meeting with our rural hospitals, and they are willing to be a provider. And it is so much more convenient for our veterans to get the health care that they have earned and to get it in their communities when they want it, where they want it, at their convenience. Yep. And I think that community care is something that should be moved on today.
Yeah, it is, and we are doing that. I've made it clear to every staff that I meet, and especially in our hospital, that community care is part of the law. Mission Act is there if they meet the qualifications. And also, if there's always a catch-fall that if the doctor sees that they could get better care in the community, they can actually do that. What we have found in the last few years is that actually, and through memos and others, has actually been not encouraged. There was an encouragement to keep everything in the VA. So we're actually moving forward with those kind of things. What we're also finding, though, is there are a lot. We have a community care group right now that is actually looking at how we do community care, and I'm looking forward to seeing their findings here in the next week or so. But what we've actually found is some roadblocks that are being put in by our own processes to not get people where they need to go. So that's something that's very important to me, and we're going to continue to look at it.
Well, I'm going to continue to work on that issue, and I appreciate your attention to community care. Thank you.
Senator Rono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, you're the chair.
Yes, thank you very much, and I'll recognize myself for questions. I want to thank all of you for being here. This is an issue that our health care marketplace has struggled with for many years. And Dr. McDonough, I do want to come to you first, because in Tennessee, where I represent, since 2010, we have had 120 of our independent pharmacies close. And this is tragic. Many times that pharmacy is the only access point for health care in these communities. And to a pharmacy, when I go in and talk with these individuals, and I'm in each of our 95 counties every year, and they will talk about how horribly they were treated by the PBMs. So I'd like for you just to talk about, for just 30 seconds, about how growth and consolidation around this PBM model has strangled not only you, but other independent pharmacies.
You know, when we saw the chart that showed the $7.3 billion in profits that the PBM industry is making, I can guarantee you during that same time, from 2017 to 2022, we just saw our profits going down to the point where we have no profits. We're being squeezed. And that's very concerning to me, because when we lose that community pharmacy, whether it's in an urban area where they might be the community pharmacy for that area, or in a rural area that we're in, they aren't coming back. I've had so many mayors and city managers and towns come to me and saying, will you open up a pharmacy? I'm like, we can't. Yeah. We can't afford to. So it has had dramatic impact on us to the point where now we've closed a pharmacy and converted another one to a hybrid telepharmacy, and that's still struggling. And I want to make it clear, it's not because we're bad business people. I want to make that perfectly clear. It's because we are not making any money on the drug, let alone the services that we provide to the patient to ensure that patient is achieving a therapeutic outcome with that medication. So we're losing it twice. We're losing it on the drug side, and we're losing it on the service side. There's no way.
You're right about that. I want to talk about bad actors with Mr. Scott for a few moments. We recently had the Department of Commerce and Insurance in Tennessee do a report that gave us some really disturbing information on one PBM in Tennessee. And what they found was that they were forcing these independent pharmacies, the non-affiliated, to pay a higher inflated rate on over 550 drugs. And they profited more than $30 million through spread pricing. Now, this gets to my first point about those 120 independent pharmacies that we have lost in Tennessee. Now, this same PBM failed to reimburse 265 pharmacy claims within the legally set 7-day business day period. And that impacted 40 separate pharmacies in the state. You know, it doesn't take a lot to connect the dots on this, and there are so many examples of these egregious practices. For the purpose of this hearing, I've given you one finding from this report. And what we have seen is, you talk about transparency, we don't have it. And it is insulting to patients and to pharmacies and pharmacists and to these independent pharmacies. So talk to me about how a $30 million spread and delayed reimbursement for pharmacy claims meets the transparency standards you claim the PBMs are putting in place.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. I can't speak specifically to the individualized example, but I can cite to another report that was recently produced by Dr. Carlton from the University of Chicago, looking at these questions and using the exact same data set that's been submitted to the FTC for their ongoing study. And the conclusion was that unaffiliated pharmacies are not being paid less than affiliated pharmacies.
Well, I will tell you, in Tennessee, that is not the case. And if you would like to see the study, I would be more than happy to submit it to you.
I will certainly take a look at it, Senator. If I could make 2 quick points.
Very quickly, my time's expired.
The practice of affiliation is not unique. Hospitals, wholesalers, grocery stores, Amazon, others are all partnering with pharmacies in order to provide that efficiency of care. And the other is, this same point has been made a couple of times, paying pharmacists to be able to do more services for patients is something that we really strongly support, and there's legislation.
Do you support that like you support the hike in administrative fees that your pharmacies have put in place? They have doubled. Doubled? You've got administrative fees for prescriber education, medication adherence, data analytics, pardon me, and these have increased 51%, 3.8 to 5.7 billion in a 2-year period of time. If I had my way, I'd do away
Senator
with
Blumenthal.
PBMs. As we look at what we're going to do with emerging technologies, having this discussion is so important, and having your input is so important. Mr. Cohen, I want to come to you because if you take the decade 2011 to 2021, there was such a surge in patents that the Chinese were filing, and by 2019, they had produced more patents than we had for the first time in history. And that should be flashing red lights to us. We all know how they reverse engineer, they steal our intellectual property. It is a cost of hundreds of billions of dollars to our nation's economy. And tomorrow, Senator Coons and I are introducing a bill, the Countering Chinese Espionage Reporting Act. And this would require the Department of Justice to submit a report to Congress on exactly what is being done to combat this IP theft that continues to take place. Talk a little bit about looking at this holistically. In addition to legislation, what are steps? What, if you could shape this response that our country has to China on this theft, what would you do?
That's a great question, and it really is the kind of question that if I was back in the government, we would have a whiteboard exercise, because there are multiple aspects that you would need to address it. To give you an example of 2 things you did not cover that are unfair acts, one is that the Chinese government has on its books a rule that requires Chinese students overseas or professionals overseas, if they plan on filing a patent based on something created overseas, to first report it to the Chinese embassy.
How interesting is that?
Another possibility that if you're Chinese, if you fill out the Chinese patent application form, there's a box you can check where you can say, I will file this patent anonymously. Why would you want to file a patent anonymously? There's actually been 2 criminal trade secret cases in the United States where an anonymous Chinese patent filing appeared in that case, where the Chinese party or the party that was stealing a trade secret for the benefit of a Chinese entity requested that his name be disclosed from the Chinese Patent Office filing. So there are actually aspects here that need to be addressed head on that are built into the Chinese legislative system. There are a lot of reasons that China became a mega patent filing destination. Most of them are related to subsidies, and some of them are related to the types of patents you can file in China. For example, my quick test on quality of Chinese patent filing is if you see that the majority of the patents are filed from September to December, it's probably because they want to use up subsidies before the end of the year.
Well, let me bring you back to the USPTO, because right now there is a backlog of 800,000 patents. And Senator Welch and I are working on legislation that would speed these patents on AI, quantum, these emerging technologies. And I would be interested in your take on that, because this is something that deals with our national security.
We have to speed up examination of patents. And we actually have a bit of a problem here, because using the patent prosecution highway, Chinese companies can secure a patent within as little as 2 to 3 months of their filing in China. Whereas a US entity filing in the United States, according to current pendency levels, will probably have to wait over 2 years, perhaps even more than 3 years. So we need to make sure that our system with China and the rest of the world is reciprocal, and that patents that are critical to the United States for its economic development are treated fairly and are expedited. We're currently not doing that.
Okay. Ms. Temple, I'm about out of time, but video piracy is something that so many of my creators in Nashville pay attention to, because it adversely impacts them. And these are individuals that lose just so much money every year. Nationwide, this is billions of dollars in loss. And I know that you all have supported site blocking legislation, and since I'm out of time, if you will just submit to me in writing instead of walking me through, just submit what you think that should look like, how we use watermarks, how we approach this to solve this problem.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate your focus, and definitely we can submit something for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
By the way, I apologize.
Thank you. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor, I do want to come to you, and I want to return to the conversation about calling the Supreme Court justices evil. You host a podcast, correct?
Yes, Senator.
And that is called Strict Scrutiny, correct?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. You made those comments on your podcast. And Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit the recording of that podcast for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In that podcast, you referenced, as Senator Kennedy said, to Justice Kagan an opinion, and you referred to the conservative justices as, and I'm quoting you, her evil colleagues. That is something you said on Strict Scrutiny in your podcast. And you, in that same podcast, you made a reference to Justice Alito. Do you recall that?
I don't recall that. We certainly do reference Justice Alito, so I believe that, but I don't recall specifically
your comment
what.
There was that he was an abject misogynist. So since this is your podcast that you hosted, and this was your opinion on that podcast. Would you like to provide explanation about why you think conservative justices are evil and why you would think Justice Alito was a misogynist? Do you care to explain yourself?
I would have to look at the transcript, Senator. I think that the dismissive approach to sex equality arguments in the Dobbs case was deeply concerning. One paragraph in the opinion suggests that there's no sex equality problem with abortion restrictions or prohibitions. I think that's deeply wrong. And in the more colloquial sort of mode of a podcast conversation, that is probably what I intended to convey, that he discounted very serious sex equality concerns.
You were angry and you let your emotions get the best of you, is basically what you're saying.
I don't think I'm saying that, Senator. I was having a conversation, and I am sure I was criticizing Justice Alito. We frequently do on my podcast.
Okay. Would you call that lack of respect?
As podcast, in the context of a podcast, we frequently, I will stipulate that we frequently demonstrate a lack of respect for writings of the Supreme Court justices.
That is good to hear that from you, that you have that admission of guilt. So thank you for that. I've got a question for the entire panel. There was discussion about Section 1507 and protesting outside of judges' residences, justices' residence, and I've got a bill, the Protecting Our Supreme Court Justices Act, and it would deter intimidation of Supreme Court justices. And in the exchange Senator Cruz had earlier, he referenced that purposeful intimidation. This would change, it would increase the maximum term of imprisonment for violation of Section 1507 from 1 year to 5 years, and increasing the maximum time, jail time for a protester under 1507 is, I think, an effective way to deter this intimidation of our justices. So I'd like to hear from each of you on this. Professor Blackman, I'm going to come to you first, and then just a very quick, short answer from each of you.
Sure. I think it's a good idea, and I think it should be enforced vigorously as well. We mentioned Judge Kaczmarek before. He's had several death threats against him. They resulted in plea bargains. So I think there's a serious problem that needs to be addressed with enforcement.
Okay. Professor Shah?
You know, I think that any law that also touches protected First Amendment conduct would need to be scrutinized carefully, so I would need to take a look. I'm not prepared to take a position here.
Violence outside of a...
No, this is about protest outside of... Protests or
intimidation.
Okay, so violence, absolutely. I mean, if we're talking about increasing penalties for violence, I would absolutely support that, yes.
Okay, great. Professor?
I certainly think we need to carefully scrutinize the level of violence and the threats against Supreme Court justices and other judges, as we saw when there was a threat against Justice Kavanaugh's life, right, an attempted threat against him and his family. So it underscores the seriousness of the issue, and I think it's important for Congress to take a look at this.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Congratulations for that. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Salsavage, I want to ask you, let me say this. We all know that China is hard at work trying to build a virtual you of each and every one of us. And this is why we need to have a federally preemptive online privacy law, which we do not have. And whether it's 23andMe and genetic information, or whether it is data security, this is something that we need. But you seem a bit naive to think that you haven't had any breaches or any attacks, cyber attacks. Our critical infrastructure in this country is hit many times a day. So what I want you to do, and you can submit this in writing, is to go into detail about how you anonymize and how you mask consumers and their information. And you can submit that during the QFR period. But I think it's important that you lay this out so that individuals know what level of protection that they are going to have. You all may sell
And then there may be an immediate buyer. You sold to 23andMe. You thought that would be a longer-term relationship. It's not. And then there may be 3 or 4 subsequent buyers. So some certainty and some awareness would be a good thing, and I want that in writing. Thank you.
Senator, thank you for that. And I'll take that back to our team as well. I do want to note that, I am clearly aware that, basically there are many cybersecurity threats. And at 23andMe, security and our customers' privacy is top of mind. And, basically we, at 23andMe do have cybersecurity threats from our foreign adversaries and others. And I will take your concerns back.
Thank you.
Okay.
I thank you for that clarification, because we deal with that issue repeatedly and the severe threats that exist each and every day. Okay, Mr. Klein, I want to come to you. Talking about a privacy standard, there are some states, including my state of Tennessee, who have stepped forward, and Tennessee in 2023 enacted the Genetic Information Privacy Act. That requires companies to protect consumer private information and to provide them with the ability to access their data, to delete their data and their account, and to destroy their biological sample. However, not all Americans enjoy this protection. So in that regard, is the Tennessee law a model for moving forward?
Well, I haven't studied that law closely, Senator, but it certainly sounds appealing to me as a citizen, as a consumer. I've been following the saga of the general federal privacy law that everyone seems to want for many years now, and the committee understands better than I do the challenges that have arisen in coming to an agreement on something that everybody seems to want. I think what the bill that Senator Cornyn and the other members have introduced demonstrates is that and the Tennessee bill, is that even as we wait for a general law, there's possibility of making progress on sector-specific issues. And in my testimony, I highlighted some of the very good things that the committee and other parts of the Congress has done on this specific threat from hostile foreign actors. And I do think, to Congress's credit, we've tightened that up considerably in the past few years.
Mr. Selsalvage, the Tennessee Attorney General issued a statement after you all filed for bankruptcy, issued a statement notifying Tennesseans of their right, pardon me, to request a deletion. So talk to me about how you were moving forward with these deletion requests.
At 23andMe, any one of our customers at any time can delete their data. For our customers, it's a simple process. All they need to do is log into their account at 23andMe, go to their settings, and request their account to be deleted. That process is automatic. We do ask for their date of birth, just as an additional verification measure. And we've complied with those deletion requests and through the bankruptcy process and prior to that.
And when they delete their account, they are also deleting their biological sample. Is that correct?
If a customer has consented for us to biobank their saliva sample, we will also delete and destroy that saliva sample upon their request to delete their data.
I yield back.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you. I think I'll start by following up with Senator Blackburn's good questions.
Now I think we're all seeing why.
Thank you. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm so pleased. I joined my colleague from Florida in saying it is time that we have this hearing. All across Tennessee, I hear from people every single week that say, what was really going on in the White House, and why would no one say anything when, with your very own eyes, you could look at any of the footage and see what was transpiring with President Biden. And I think the fact that many of his own cabinet members knew that he was not fit to serve and that there was a cabal behind the curtain who was making all the decisions. It is so offensive
to the American people. And it's not something that is a partisan issue. As I talk with Democrats, many of them have lost faith in what they thought was going to be a very moderate Joe Biden administration, and it turned into be the far left Bernie Sanders version of the Democrat Party that was using the auto pen and making decisions and committing our great nation to policies that the American people did not support and would never have supported. And I fully believe that because of that overreach and that flippant attitude that much of his staff had toward the policies of this nation, to people in the administration that chuckled about tossing gold bars off the Titanic. They knew they were going down. They knew they were going to be found out. And they probably knew at some point there would be a hearing like today, and the other side of the dais would be completely empty because no one can defend what they did. Mr. Wold, I want to come to you for a moment and talk about something that was really a disturbing revelation from the Tapper Thompson book. And you know, this is part of the thing. Now we're finding out the media was all a part of the joke. They were part of the ruse. They were part of the fraud that was pushed forward. A Biden staffer told the authors that Biden just had to win and then he could disappear for 4 years. That's all they needed to do. And, you know, it is, the following statement was, he'd only have to show proof of life every once in a while. And as I had a Tennessean say to me, when they had actually downloaded this book and read it, and then they said, you know, how stupid do they think we are? And the disrespect this administration showed to the American people. Why is it that the American people appreciate that President Trump goes out and nearly every day is taking questions and answering questions? Is because they have now found out that these staffers were willing to do undemocratic things, as using their term, to keep the president in office, to keep Biden there. They were willing to do undemocratic things, unlawful things. So, Mr. Wold, let's talk about that behavior and how that undermines the faith of Tennesseans and all Americans in our public institutions, because they could see what was happening, but they were being lied to by people in the White House who were probably then running in their office and saying, well, we pulled it off another day.
Yeah, Senator, I mean, this is a theme you've talked about for many years, which is the executive branch is enormous. I mean, there are close to 1,000 employees in the executive office of the president. There are nearly 4 million full-time federal employees throughout the 14 departments that the president oversees. Executive power as accountable to the people of this country really manifests in two ways. The power of the president to remove bureaucrats and to fire them, and to affix his signature to official actions that he undertakes. So when the Washington establishment says something to the effect of, well, democracy dies in darkness, yes, it does when there are staffers, the media, cabinet officials, senior advisors to the president who all create a covering sort of shroud of darkness that obscures who is actually making the decisions. And one other thing I'll just say very quickly, a number of your colleagues on the Democrat side have said, well, there's an OLC opinion here. We don't need to talk anymore. There's an OLC opinion. It says you can use the auto pen.
the opening paragraph of that OLC opinion says you can use the AutoPin, but only when the president directs that you do so under his decision-making power, right? It is very clear again and again that the president actually has to make the decision. That cannot be delegated to a staffer or an advisor. And there's no indication here that anyone other than staff were making these decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here. You know, the visual, sometimes it really is true. A picture speaks louder than words. It's worth 1,000 words. And here, all you have to do is...
Well, thank you.
It is perfectly fine that you went over. This is the first of our hearings that are going to look at this virtual space. And as you all know, Senator Klobuchar and I've done a lot of work in trying to secure the American citizens' privacy in the virtual space. And as we work through this on this committee, I think that foundational to the conversations is who owns an internet user's data and what is the scope of that ownership? Where does it begin? Where does it end? And let's just go down the line. Ms. Goodloe, starting with you, and everybody keep it under a minute and answer that question so that we've got that for the record.
Thank you for the question. Our companies provide business-to-business technologies to other companies. In many cases, their business customers own the data that they store with B2B providers, and yet there may be personal data that individuals own as well. And those individuals should have rights like to access, correct, and delete that information, no matter whether it's stored with a consumer-facing company or the business-to-business provider processing it on behalf of that consumer-facing company.
Okay, Mr. Thayer.
Given the lack of appropriate consent regimes, I would say that the user owns that data, because I don't think that the way we have things set up right now, the data subject doesn't even know that they've given over some of that data. And so at the end of the day, I think the reality is that we have to have privacy regimes in place to ensure that the ownership, to outline those particular contours, but it is 100% you own your data, and it shouldn't be the other way around.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator, for your question. It's a very good question. There are some nuances here, I think, that are important. First, Main Street businesses, understand it's the user's data, and the user has the right to correct it, delete it, remove it from their system. But there are some kinds of data that is considered shared. And so, for example, if you make a purchase in a store, well, the store needs to keep a record of that purchase if you want to do a return or an exchange for their inventory. So, is it the consumers that this consumer made this purchase on this date? Is that personal information? Yes. Is it also information the business needs and can't just get rid of? Yes. And so I think when it comes down to ownership, we just have to understand that in modern, commerce and e-commerce, some information will need to be retained, but only for as long as it's necessary to retain it. And I think hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Chair Blackburn. We believe that we all have a fundamental right to control when our data is used and how it is collected. But individual mechanisms of consent and control don't provide a complete solution to this problem, and that's why we feel that it is so important to have rules of the road that protect people's privacy by default and align business collection and use data practices with what consumers reasonably expect.
Thank you, Senator. I very much agree with Mr. Butler. Data about people should be owned by people, but at the same time, as Alan said, we don't want a world in which people are solely responsible for protecting their own privacy. That's why we need strong federal protections that don't put the onus on people, but put the onus on companies to make sure they're not abusing people's privacy.
Yep. It was over a decade ago that now Senator Welch and I were in the House at Energy and Commerce Committee. I know Mr. Martino remembers all of this, and we had bipartisan legislation to establish a data privacy framework. And of course, big tech fought it just all the way to today, we still don't have it into law. So, Mr. Thayer, talk for a minute about why big tech has found it so vitally important to kill any effort to have federal online privacy.
Because it's against their financial interest to actually be regulated. I mean, that's the obvious answer. But in reality, what you're pointing out, and I think everyone on this subcommittee has experienced, it doesn't matter how tailored you make your legislation. It doesn't matter how measured. They will find some reason and put something forward. If you want to do antitrust reform, for instance, they'll say there's a privacy violation. If you say there's privacy, then we have to worry about competition. It's always this game of whack-a-mole. And so at the end of the day, they like the way things are because it benefits them. The market is basically created for them. And so I think this is exactly why we have strong advocates fighting for things like the Kids Online Safety Act, where you have parents begging Congress to do something, and we're seeing the harms play out right in front of us. I think at this point, we've recognized that big tech is in the emperor has no pants moment, and we're all starting to see that we absolutely need the reforms. And so things like the Open App Markets Act are going to be very helpful to quell any of those privacy concerns. The Kids Online Safety Act, I think, will do a lot to find measured, targeted approaches that will ultimately help kids. And then but again, I think that the waves are changing, and I think that I'm very hopeful. And things that I'm seeing at the DOJ, especially from the first Trump administration to the Biden administration, out the gate to the new Trump administration, it seems as if everyone has identified that these companies are bad actors and they should not be trusted. So I hope whatever advocacy I can provide would be to outline that this is really just don't fall for the red herrings. Ultimately, the side of right is to protect consumers, and big tech has no interest in doing that.
Ms. Goodloe, I want to come back to you. In your testimony, you talked about state laws and the importance of some of those state laws. I want you to define a couple of the common elements that you have seen in the state laws that could be transferred into a federal law that should be broadly supported and accepted.
Thank you for the question. I think the states provide a lot of common ground for Congress to look to as it works toward federal privacy legislation. That common ground exists on things like the consumer rights that we've talked about today, rights to access, correct, delete, and port your data to another service, rights to opt out of the sale of your data, targeted advertising, certain types of profiling. And states are unanimous on recognizing there are different types of companies that handle consumers' data. One set of obligations should be assigned to controllers who decide how and why to collect a consumer's data, how to use it. And one set of obligations should be put on the processors that handle the data on behalf of controllers. I also want to take a moment to respond to something that Mr. Martino brought up about what those processors do when they employ other sub-processors, because in many cases what processors do is they collect a series of other sub-processors, package it together, and are able to provide it to business customers at scale so that their small businesses can enjoy the economies of scale of being able to use cutting-edge technologies. Mm-hmm. That means you're providing the same service to hundreds or thousands of business customers, and letting one object to a package of sub-processors doesn't work. That's why we haven't seen the majority of states adopt that, which could actually increase security risk to consumers when one of those sub-processors has a breach and they have to go and ask permission to change over the data. But I think we do see broad agreement among the states about the right set of consumer rights and obligations on businesses to safeguard consumers' data and to do so effectively, along with a common enforcement system that is a regulatory-led enforcement system to ensure we have consistent expectations for companies that want to comply with privacy and security obligations.
Mr. Martino, you wanted to respond?
Yes, just on the sub-processor point, and one thing to keep in mind with the ADPPA, that was the predecessor to the APRA, the way the definitions worked, a sub-processor was also defined as a processor. So once it got to a processor, there could be this endless train of data sharing that the Main Street business has no control over. Well, that might be great for efficiencies of the services that the main processor is providing. There's no check on the downstream, and so that's why all that we've been pushing for was a simple notice to the Main Street business of the sub-processor you are using and the right to object. It's not like an opt-in that that they can't go to them and they can't provide these efficiencies. So that's just it's an in the weeds point, but I think it's an important point because it's the Main Street businesses that will be held liable under most of these constructs because the same requirements aren't applying to the processors and the same enforcement mechanisms aren't applying. I'll make one last point. In the APRA, the private right of action largely applied only to what are called the controllers, but of course these Main Street businesses that can't really control the big tech companies, and it hardly applied to the processors, and it didn't apply at all to the third parties. So I think we have to look at not just that these state laws have requirements, but who's subject to them and who's liable for those violations.
Okay. You had additional questions? Go ahead.
It's really an extraordinary.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that, and I do appreciate that we're taking up the Access Act and that we have a pilot on mental health that will look more comprehensively, if you will, at what we could do with community care. One of the things that has concerned me, and I've worked for years on community care and opening up the opportunity for community care. And as we have worked on these issues, one of the things that we have found is that about 80% of the VA workforce, 80% is unionized workforce, and they continue to push against provisions like community care, expanding the Access Act. And our goal should be to make health care convenient and to provide more options for our veterans. And to me, taking the Access Act to permanence is something we should do to honor that sacrifice that the veterans have done. Having pilots on community care in areas other than just mental health is something that we should do. As you mentioned, you have someone that is 6 hours from a veterans clinic. Tennessee is a long state. Upper East Tennessee is closer to the Canadian border than it is to Memphis, Tennessee. And having these veterans, giving them the ability to go in their community to get the care that they need is something that we should do. So yes, permanence on access, more broadly allowing community care so that veterans can get what they need when they need it. And I think it is imperative that we stop letting the unions dictate what they want. We saw during COVID, we had VBA staff that was required to show up only 2 days out of a 2-week work period in the office, 2 days in person. And in healthcare, we heard from the secretary, they only had to show up 5 days. And then we wonder why we have such a backlog. So I am supporting the Access Act. I think we should push this further and make it permanent so veterans know that they are not going to have to guess if something is going to continue. They're going to know what they're going to get. Thank you.
Senator Blackburn, thank you.
Report regarding this matter.
Thank you, Ms. Savage. We'll begin our questioning now, and Ms. Savage, let me start with you. You talk about Meta's refusal to acknowledge the harms, but I think many people who are watching this hearing today don't know what those harms would be. So just very quickly, let's talk about if you were an 8-year-old girl and what you would experience in an unsafe situation in the metaverse.
Thank you. I think it's important to start by describing briefly what it's like to use VR, especially because a lot of parents haven't. So, you're wearing a headset on your head, it's strapped to your face, and it completely obscures your vision and your hearing. So you can no longer see the real world around you, which can also feel very vulnerable because people can come up behind you in real life. And this means that some of the experiences in VR can feel heightened because you're already feeling vulnerable. VR is designed to be immersive and embodied. That's its appeal. And so when you experience things in VR, they feel meaningfully more real, psychologically more real than if you were to experience that same thing on a television. You also have an avatar that you are embodying and which research shows us you identify with. So if something happens to your avatar, it feels like it's happening to you. It's also important to note that this is a social space, so there are other users with bodies that can corner you, that can surround you, that can touch you, and folks can also speak to you.
And let me add in there, users who are not known to you.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's most common for you to be interacting with people you don't know in real life. And a lot of parents in my research indicated that they weren't aware that their children were interacting with strangers.
All right.
Just to be very explicit, because it's not something that I think a lot of people have exposure with, when we talk about harms for children and for adults in VR, and we talk about things that are said, the audio that's transmitted isn't just solicitation or speech. There will also be instances that we have seen of where you can hear people sexually pleasuring themselves transmitted over audio in a spatial sense as you are being surrounded and brigaded and being harassed. So it's not just simple statements, it is actually the transmission of the motion and the audio of sex acts itself.
And so that is what causes children to have the physiological and psychological response as if it were happening to them in the real world.
Yes, exactly. Visually and auditorily, it feels real.
Okay. Dr. Sadazan, I'm going to come to you. Senator Blumenthal and I wrote to Meta back in April, really sounding the alarm on some of their policies with AI chatbots entering into sensual conversations with children. And these policies went so far as to allow chatbots to tell a shirtless boy, and I'll quote this, "Every inch of you is a masterpiece, a treasure I cherish deeply," end quote. So you've been through this process at Meta, dealing with them. Does it surprise you that they would allow their chatbots to engage in these conversations with children?
No, not at all. One thing that I'd like to just sort of caveat this is I never directly worked on the Meta AI chatbot team, but I did work directly on Facebook ranking. And to not get in the tech weeds with this, Facebook ranking or ranking in general is sort of a sibling to artificial intelligence. It's actually something that's included with AI algorithms. And when I worked on the Facebook ranking team, I was working on how algorithms could be used to keep people safer whenever they see things that are shown to them in marketplace. They see sexual content, we take it away, et cetera. Ranking is something that uses, generally speaking, more structured data that is easier to control for safety. And even when I was working on ranking, that was something that when I would try to work on the teams to improve safety, they were unable to do.
Okay, let me ask you this.
Sure.
Talking about algorithms, I know Meta has said TikTok is their main competitor. So is Meta intentionally intensifying their algorithms in order to be able to compete more closely with TikTok?
It is so much sillier than that. When I attempted to look at things called coefficients or variables to make these algorithms safer. The engineers themselves told me that they didn't actually look at them because if the algorithm predicted it and engagement went up, then it must be good. So to answer your original question, no, this doesn't surprise me at all because in the context of something like ranking, if they can't figure it out, I have no idea why they would ever be able to figure it out with an AI as well.
Got it. Senator Klobuchar, you're recognized. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that bonuses were given on user engagement, correct?
Correct.
Were bonuses ever given for creating safety protocols?
To answer that question, I was instructed over years for my safety and integrity work leading to protocols to be tied solely to engagement. So in my professional opinion, engagement is not the best measure of if people are safe. It's if people are safe. Yet from management and leadership, we were told repeatedly that safety initiatives had to be tied to user engagement.
There you go. And did you get the sense that Mr. Zuckerberg was intimately involved in decision-making around the suppression of child safety research?
Would it be helpful to describe what the company used to be like before 2021?
I believe so. So when I joined the company in 2018, we used to do things called Zuck reviews. This is when Mark Zuckerberg would come to us or to a team and say, "Hi, I'd like you to do a presentation on marketplace safeties, Facebook dating, etc." When I joined in 2018, I would be in those reviews. I would make a slide. I was asked to contribute to those reviews. And magically, after Frances Haugen's disclosure in 2021, those Zuck reviews went away. Management and leadership still told us that they would have reviews with him about sensitive topics, but it was never directly stated if he saw your work. The reason that we were told from management and leadership was because they didn't want to have a trail of knowing that he was reviewing sensitive information. But because we were reviewed and our performance was reviewed on if higher-ups had seen this stuff, management would look at the two of us and say, hey, it's going up to the higher-ups. If it was the CTO, if it was the VP or anybody else, they would use their name. And if it went up to Mark Zuckerberg, they'd say, hey, it went up the chain to leadership. But I don't know if you had another example for that.
After 2021, that's the only thing that changed. It was only the absence of Mr. Zuckerberg's name.
So, in essence, what they did was change the culture to insulate themselves so they would not be sued by parents or by others. They suppressed the research. They used third-party vendors to put up a wall. And again, what we have seen them do is to put profit over children, and they have used children as a profit center when those children are online, regardless of the harms. I want to thank you all. You've been excellent witnesses, and we are very grateful. We would invite, I joined Senator Blumenthal, if someone from Meta, and I'm sure they are all watching this and they're texting one another back and forth or signaling so they don't get caught, if they want to challenge what they've heard today, I would encourage them to come forward. I think that they see there is truly bipartisan anger, not only with Meta, but with these other social media platforms and virtual reality platforms and chatbots that are intentionally, knowingly harming our children. And this has got to stop. Enough is enough. We are intent on passing the Kids Online Safety Act. I think today has really laid out more of the reason for doing that. We will continue to submit questions to you for the committee. That will go through Tuesday, September 16th at 5 p.m. We would ask that you respond in a timely manner within a week to those questions. We're grateful to you all. We're grateful to the parents. And this hearing. Yes, you go right ahead.
I just want to thank you, Madam Chair, and our witnesses. And just to reiterate that the company can come before this subcommittee. They can provide us answers. But the best way to resolve this is to get this bill passed, to realize there's more and more senators that are interested in going even farther, and that this is a reality on this committee right now, including with the chair and ranking member of the entire Judiciary Committee, and that they need to start taking this seriously. If not for us, and whatever power we have, the fact that we were able to get some bills passed over the last few years, not nearly as much as we want, that they have to understand that we are very serious about this, and that this hearing and your willingness to come forward, the family's willingness to come forward, can make change. It's just a question if they want to have any input in it, or if they just want to make anonymous or spokesperson comments about it without actually being willing to come forward. And so we're ready to talk to them, but mostly we want to get something done. We're tired of the talk.
Hearing adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
As you all are aware, we have a vote series that is taking place. But I do want to say thank you so much for our witnesses being here and for each of you being here today. We will hear from Dr. Jason Satizan and Ms. Casey Savage. They are two brave whistleblowers who have come forward to detail shocking allegations about Meta's cover-up of deeply disturbing child safety research. They were hired to purportedly make the platform safer for children. But what they found was a company that knew their products were unsafe, and they just did not care. Nearly 4 years ago, I held my first hearing with a Meta whistleblower who detailed how Meta exploits our children online simply to maximize user engagement and boost their profits. Since then, we've seen a national movement of parents, legislators, whistleblowers, and children that have said enough is enough. Our children are more precious than the interest of depraved big tech CEOs, and that Congress must pass the bipartisan Kids Online Safety Act. After all these years, Meta continues to knowingly allow sexual exploitation and harms to children on their platforms. I'm incredibly grateful that individuals are still willing to come forward and shine a light on Meta's disturbing, willful, and intentional actions. Mark Zuckerberg has promised that, and I'm quoting him, in the metaverse, you'll be able to do almost anything you can imagine, end quote. And for once, Mr. Zuckerberg's statement rings true. That is, for predators, for pedophiles, for groomers, for traffickers, and all kinds of disgusting bad actors. As these whistleblowers will explain, the metaverse has become the Wild West for criminals who prey on our children. As our witnesses will tell us today, virtual reality can be incredibly dangerous for children, specifically because of the immersive nature of the technology. Children have a much harder time processing the difference between violence and abuse in the physical and virtual spaces. In other words, when their avatar on Meta's virtual reality platform is raped or harassed, children experience that trauma as if it is actually happening to them. Let's be clear, virtual reality is reality. These harms are real, and this abuse happens every single day, every day, on Meta's reality platforms. One employee stated on an internal message board in 2017, and again, I quote, "We have a child problem, and it's probably time to talk about it," end quote. That was 2017. One of their employees stating, "We have a child problem." But years later, Meta's C-suite has zero interest in these findings. According to these whistleblowers, Meta executives decided they didn't want to see research detailing how harmful their products are to children. So they unleashed their attack dogs within Meta Legal on the research teams, intent on creating a rosy picture of their products. Meta Legal manipulated research methods and buried negative data. Meta instructed researchers to avoid asking teen survey participants questions which might lead them to discuss harms they've experienced because of Meta's design. And when their suppression didn't work, they just simply deleted the evidence. They erased it so no one would know. In one user review, Meta's Horizon Worlds was dubbed, and I quote, "the pedophile kingdom," end quote. This makes clear what we have known for years, that Meta profits from the sexualization and abuse of children. If you need another example, look at the recent report that Meta's own internal guidelines allowed AI chatbots to engage in sensual conversations with children. Their refusal to protect children and to instead profit at the expense of kids' safety, this is revolting. It is heinous conduct. Again, I want to thank the two whistleblowers that are here with us today and the other whistleblowers who have come forward who are not here. I know that this was not an easy decision for either of you, but what you're doing brings us one step closer to holding these big tech platforms accountable. We have parents in the room today. Parents all across the nation are speaking out, and we thank you. And to Maureen, Brian, Mia, Christine, those parents that have lost their children to social media harms, we're grateful that you're here and grateful for your passion to make sure that no parent ever has to experience the trauma that you have experienced. With your help, we will get the Kids Online Safety Act passed, and we will get it to the President's desk, and we will hold big tech accountable. Now I turn to Senator Klobuchar. Before the hearing started, we are so grateful for you and just the fact that you're willing to make yourself vulnerable, to open up your life, to talk about what happened in your family and to your child and the repercussions of that. I know this has to be painful. And Senator Blumenthal talked earlier, as you all know, we have worked for years on the Kids Online Safety Act that would give that toolbox, that would put requirements on social media and on these platforms and would require there to be a responsibility, a safety by design, and a duty of care so that you can hold a social media platform to account. And of course, you know, we see and hear all the time from social media, they don't want regulation, they fight regulation. They have fought us every step of the way on trying to put something in place. And they like it being the Wild West. And Ms. Garcia, you mentioned it, that they like for children to be online longer and longer every day. Our children are the product when they are online. And there are no warnings. In the physical world, you can't take children to certain movies until they're a certain age. You can't have them play certain video games until they're a certain age. You can't sell alcohol, tobacco, firearms, have a kid enter a contract. You can't take them to a strip club. You can't expose them to pornography, because in the physical world, there are laws. And they would lock up that liquor store. They would put that strip club operator in jail if they had kids there. But in the virtual space, it's like the Wild West, 24/7, 365. I have grandchildren, and it just tugs at my heart because of what I see happening to children and to people that we know in our community, and what kids are being exposed to, because you cannot unsee some of this. And shame on these tech companies that are spending millions of dollars lobbying against any kind of regulation. You know, and Ms. Doe, I think you said they offered you $100 in arbitration. What a slap in the face. How insulting. That's like Meta said kids were worth $270 a year to them. It is so callous, and it is so disrespectful of this generation. They see a revenue stream, and buddy, they are going for it, even if it ruins the lives of our children. Shame on them. So, to any of these companies, Character AI, any of them, if what you're hearing on our panel today is not representative of your company, call us, show up. Let us hear your side of the story. My office number, 202-224-3344. You got it? Mark Zuckerberg and all the rest of you out here, call us. Let us hear from you. Anyway, I think what they're doing is shameful. Mr. Torney, I do want to come to you. When Senator Blumenthal and I sent a letter to Meta in April, and I think he mentioned this to you all, talking about the allegations that the Wall Street Journal had posted about intentionally training these chatbots to engage in this sexually explicit and sensual conversation with minors. And we didn't get anything from them worth anything, and certainly no apology to the parents and the children. Instead, they had an unnamed spokesman. They are such chickens. They won't even put their name behind what they're saying. They are pure chickens. Here's what the unnamed spokesman said. The use case of this product, which is the chatbots, in the way described is so manufactured that it's not just fringe, it's hypothetical. So, to Meta and to Mark Zuckerberg, let me tell you something. As a parent and a grandparent, it is not hypothetical when you ruin a kid's life. That is not hypothetical. That is destruction. It is absolute destruction of a precious child. And what kids don't realize when they are in the metaverse and when they're having these conversations with these chatbots, they're not distinguishing between real life and what is going on virtually. It becomes one and the same, and it is absolutely so wrong. So I want you to speak for just a moment, Mr. Torney, about the unwillingness of social media to address any of this.
Thank you, Senator. I think it's just very clear that we have shared our risk assessments and our findings with these companies, and in Meta's particular case, their actions speak for themselves. We've heard from their crisis teams. This has been a PR response. There hasn't been any meaningful engagement around trying to address the issues that we've uncovered in our testing.
Well, my time is up, but to Meta and Meta's leadership, my office number again, 202-224-3344. I have staff members standing by to take your call, and if you're too chicken to do it, maybe we'll subpoena you and pull your sorry you-know-what's in here to get some answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You know,
And Director Patel, thank you ever so much for being with us today. And I want to thank you for your commitment to fight violent crime in Memphis. And when you first came to meet with me before your hearing here, I gave you the stats on Memphis, Tennessee, and their crime rates. And then you committed then and again at your confirmation to help us. You have been true to your word, and we are very, very grateful. Operation Viper has been such a success. The 500 arrests are important. These are gang members and gang leaders out of Memphis, Tennessee. There are over 100 gangs in Memphis. So the impact of these arrests, the impact of 100 indictments of these gang members. And now we have a U.S. Attorney's Office that will actually prosecute violent crimes and actually take up and prosecute federal gun crimes. This is helping to make Memphis safe again. And yesterday at the White House, to have the president announce the second phase of this with bringing in the Guard, and we've got ATF and DEA and the U.S. Marshals and Homeland Security, and the work that you and General Bondi and the President have done is so appreciated by the people of Memphis, Shelby County, West Tennessee, and I am ever so grateful for the work you've done. You know, one of the things as we talk about Memphis and what a vibrant and wonderful historic city it is, it's important to realize Memphis is one of the logistics hubs in our country. You have I-40, which goes East Coast to West Coast. You have the Port of Memphis. You have FedEx. You have all 5 Class A railroads that are there, as well as so many companies that are important to Memphis. And I have found it so interesting that some of my colleagues want to complain about agents being taken out of the DC office and actually put to work in the field because they've been needed in the field. And you can look at the stats from Operation Viper and see the difference that they have made. And we so appreciate that. I do want to drill down just a little bit on the issue of cargo theft, which ties into the logistics hub in Memphis. We've got a lot of companies that go through there. IMC is a big logistics company. People in Memphis know what it takes to keep America moving. But what a lot of people may not realize is that many of these criminal gangs have been focused on cargo theft. This is how they pay for their activities. So in addition to the carjackings and the home robberies and the smash and grabs and some of the human and sex trafficking, they've gotten into cargo theft, and cargo theft in Memphis has increased over 5,000%. 5,000%. That's what you saw
with a Biden administration who wouldn't drill down on this. So having these agents out in the field, having an interagency approach is something that is going to help us with getting our hands around this cargo theft. So talk for just a minute about what your team has done there and the importance of having that interagency approach.
Absolutely, Senator. So Operation Viper nests under Operation Summer Heat, and in multiple cities and mid-major cities across the country, we have surging resources based on crime. And Memphis, as you know, Senator, had the highest per capita homicide rate in the country, and that was simply unacceptable. And so what we did was what we call phase 01 of operations at the president's direction. We went into some of these cities quietly to collect the intelligence that was necessary to start these operations, to start seizing these firearms, which we've seized, I think, over 115 firearms off the streets, to start taking narcotics off the streets, and also to infiltrate the gang network, this criminal street gang network that is providing these guns and drugs to the public in these communities, allowing for these shootings. And so what the FBI is good at, what the FBI is great at, is partnering with our local authorities in places like Memphis and Miami, and Chicago, and so many other cities across the country, to start the work, because you can't do the work on a dartboard basis. You need ground level intelligence, and that's what we do working with our state and local law enforcement. And the results, I think they said over 100 indictments federally just in this 3-4 month surge, and now we're going to go in there with more resources to finish it.
And we are grateful for that, and I think it's so important for my colleagues, what we have seen in Memphis. You mentioned something very important. Your agents go in and they go in quietly. There was no press conference. There was no fanfare. You went in there to work. And very importantly, you gathered the intel. Who are these gang leaders? Where are they? Figuring out who was doing what, and then setting up the process to apprehend these individuals. And it requires infiltrating those networks and having that data to work from so that you are working in partnership. And as I have talked with elected leaders in Shelby County and Memphis, as we have talked with those in law enforcement, they have been so grateful to have this support and this additional education that comes, because local police are learning from your agents when they are learning how to track these gangs and infiltrate these networks. We know that phase 2 of this operation is going to kick off. The Guard is going to be there to support the Memphis Police Department to help them kind of catch up, because they still have a lot of people on their board. They know who they are, where they are, what they're doing. They want to apprehend them and bring them forward. So talk a little bit about how phase 2 is going to continue to work to support the law enforcement efforts in Memphis.
Well, it's just like what happened here in Washington, D.C. It takes a whole of government interagency approach where we're working with the Attorney General, the DEA, the ATF, the U.S. Marshals, Department of Homeland Security, because each one of those agencies has specialized capabilities. And when we surge together to work off of the ground level intelligence was collected, you see what happened in Washington, D.C. here. And that's the next phase of it, because you are able to utilize the National Guard to set up border perimeter operations. So when you go into an area, you have the secure workspace to get in there and stay in there. The key here, Senator, is sustained criminal investigations and sustained prosecutions that clear Memphis, like we did Washington, permanently, and leave behind a blueprint for what local law enforcement can do with our federal partners to sustain that. We don't want to go backwards, and that's critical, but we're in the next step. Sustaining it will be the last one.
Well, and we certainly appreciate that. I do want to touch on Operation Restore Justice. And Senator Britt mentioned some of this very briefly, and I know that you and A.G. Bondi have done a tremendous amount of work in protecting children. I appreciate that.
And we passed my Report Act last year. And President Biden signed it. And this does require social media to report to NCMEC so that we can have these perpetrators followed up with and apprehended. That's a good start. We're still trying to get the Kids Online Safety Act passed. That has been a bipartisan effort. We have looked with disdain at what has happened with Discord and Charlie Kirk's alleged killer. Talk for a moment about what else Congress ought to do in order to give you all the toolbox you need to apprehend these predators and pedophiles.
Well, I think we need to go after the monetary backbone of this infrastructure like we discussed earlier. I think we also need to make parents across the country aware of how invasive some of these social media sites are and how much criminal enterprise is going on and how easily these kids can be sucked into it. And also, the only way, in my opinion, to do that, as Senator Klobuchar and I believe Senator Graham had stated, was, we need to work on Section 230. It's been too long since we've addressed it. Nobody's being held accountable. They're making money, and our youth is dying. And that's just unacceptable.
Well, we have that reform bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Welch.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Madam Attorney General, let me ask you this question. Were you consulted by the White House before they deployed National Guard troops to cities in the United States?
I am not going to discuss any internal conversations with the White House.
You won't even say whether you talked to the White House about this?
I am not going to discuss any internal conversations with the White House with you, Ranking Member.
I noticed that. What's the secret? Why do you want to keep this secret? The American people don't know the rationale behind the deployment of National Guard troops in my state. The word is, and I think it's been confirmed by the White House, they are going to transfer Texas National Guard units to the state of Illinois. What's the rationale for that?
Yeah, Chairman, as you shut down the government, you voted to shut down the government, and you're sitting here, our law enforcement officers aren't being paid. They're out there working to protect you. I wish you loved Chicago as much as you hate President Trump. And currently, the National Guard are on the way to Chicago. If you're not going to protect your citizens, President Trump will.
I've been on this committee for more than 20 years. That's the kind of testimony you expect from this administration. A simple question as to whether or not they had a legal rationale for deploying National Guard troops becomes grounds for a personal attack. I think it's a legitimate question. It's my responsibility. She refuses to answer as to whether she had any conversation with the White House about deploying national troops to my state. That's an indication, I'm afraid, where we are politically in this place. Let me ask you another question. I want to, if you will, hold on a second. Make sure I got the right page of facts here. You testified under oath when you last before this committee that before your appointment to Attorney General, you had served as a representative of some sort for the royal family of Qatar. There was an issue that came before you in May when President Trump accepted a $400 million luxury jet from the royal family of Qatar for temporary use as Air Force One before it's permanently gifted to the Trump Presidential Library Foundation. The Constitution unequivocally bestows on Congress the power to control whether any officer of the United States, including the President, may accept a gift, quote, from any king, prince, or foreign state, end of quote. And this gift clearly violates the statutory regime enacted by Congress. You've refused to answer a letter I sent to you 5 months ago asking the legal rationale you relied on to advise President Trump to accept this unprecedented gift from your former legal client. Can you make a promise today that you will disclose that?
Disclose what, Ranking Member?
I assume there was a letter or some sort of statement from your office to the White House to advise them that you felt it was permissible?
First, to address my role with Qatar, as I addressed with you during my confirmation hearing, I disclosed it in my SJQ. In private practice, I worked for Qatar for anti-human trafficking for the World Cup. That was my only involvement, and I made that very clear, and I'm very proud of everything I've done with anti-human trafficking. Obviously, in preparing any advice for the President on a jet or anything else, we consult with the Office of Legal Counsel. The confidentiality applies to their input as well. And Chairman, if you would approve and vote to approve, as Chairman Grassley said, excuse me, Ranking Member, as Chairman Grassley said, my employees, we would answer your letters a lot faster, yet you're stalling them at every stop. And to go back to your previous question, your city has a murder rate 5 times higher than New York's. 571 homicides last year. If you were serious about protecting your people, you would be asking this administration for help. You're saying that we're coming into your state and your city. We're there to help make America safe and Illinois safe, whether or not you want to.
I believe cutting federal grant programs to law enforcement in my state and across the nation does not make us any safer, and you've done just that. You've supplanted that decision by sending in National Guard troops to California and other places. That is a situation where the governors have not asked for that help. If you truly wanted to do this on a bipartisan basis, you wouldn't defy a governor, you would work with them. I'm prepared to do that. I'm prepared to work with this administration. But cutting these grants to law enforcement does not make us any stronger as a nation or give us the tools we need to reduce crime in Chicago. Now, I'd just like to ask you, when it came to this Cutter situation, did you consult with the ethics office in the Department of Justice before making your decision on this gift of a jet?
Chairman, I didn't gift a jet to anyone. My Office of Legal Counsel provides confidential advice to the President, to the White House, period. And you're conflating two issues. Cutting grants, I was very clear about what grants we've cut and what grants we haven't, only 7%. And if you have a grant in Illinois that you think that I've cut that is protecting law enforcement officers or your people, you personally call me and I will work with you to turn that grant back on. I think many of the Democrats here can tell you, I have worked with them to turn grants back on. There's an appeal process. Tell me a specific grant that I have turned off in Illinois that would help law enforcement, and I will work with you. But you have not done that.
Did you take a look?
The National Guard is on the way right now as we speak. Oh, by the way, so is Director Patel and Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. You're sitting here grilling me, and they're on their way to Chicago to keep your state safe.
Madam Attorney General, it's my job to grill you. Investigation of your agency is part of my responsibility and this committee. You may not like the experience, but others have weathered the storm and answered questions in a respectful manner.
Can you tell me the grants,
Yes.
Ranking Member, please?
Take a look at the President's budget on HIDA grants. What happens to it in his proposed budget?
I'd be glad to meet with you on the
It's
grants.
cut by 1/3 from $300 million to 196. That's one example of a grant that works, and your administration has suggested cutting it in the budget lies ahead. I want to ask you about items in a letter I sent you in July that you have not answered. In February, you made a public claim that the Epstein client list was, quote, sitting on my desk right now for review, end of quote. You then produced already public information and no client list at a major media event hosted at the White House. Attorney General Bondi, why did you publicly claim to have the Epstein client list waiting for your review and then produce nothing relevant to that claim?
Senator Durbin, if you listen to my entire clip on that, I said I had not reviewed it yet, that it was sitting on my desk along with the JFK files, the Martin Luther King files, and I said I had not yet reviewed it. And if you see our memo on Epstein, you will see, excuse me, our memo on Epstein clearly points out that there was no client list, our July 6th memo. You also didn't let me respond to the HIDA question. The budget transfers $196 million for high-intensity drug trafficking areas to the Office of Justice Programs, OJP. The Justice Department will continue to administer those grants under OJP in 2026.
Going back to the Epstein files, according to another whistleblower who made a protected disclosure to my office, you pushed the FBI to review approximately 100,000 Epstein-related records on an arbitrarily short deadline in March and the FBI was directed to flag any documents that mentioned President Trump. Nothing came of that review until July when DOJ and FBI released an unsigned memo stating, quote, "there's no incriminating client list." Why was the July 7th memo unsigned?
The July 7th memo came from the FBI and the Department of Justice. Director Patel answered those questions very clear. And, you know, Senator Durbin, I find it very interesting that you refused repeated Republican requests to release the Epstein flight logs in 2023 and 2024. You fought that. Did you take money from Reid Hoffman, campaign donations, who was a huge Epstein friend? Why did you fight for years? Why did you fight to not disclose the flight logs, Senator Durbin?
I can tell you I did not refuse. One of the senators here wished to produce those logs, and I asked her to put it in writing, and she never did.
Yeah, I think Senator Blackburn would quarrel with you on that.
Well, I will quarrel with you as to Reid, somebody that you mentioned I never heard of.
Reid Hoffman.
So who gave the order to flag records related to President Trump?
To flag records for President Trump?
To flag any records which included his name.
I'm not going to discuss anything about that with you, Senator.
Eventually, you're going to have to answer for your conduct in this. And you won't do it today, but eventually you will. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
I got
Mr. Chairman.
something here.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
Chairman, since Senator Durbin referred to me, I would really appreciate the opportunity to correct the record.
Proceed.
Because Senator Durbin knows I repeatedly asked for those flight logs. I brought up the subpoena. You even shut down the committee because you didn't want that, and you know I submitted that in writing, and you continue to misrepresent that, and I am not going to let that record stand.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Durbin.
I just want to make it clear that the reason the committee business ended was that your side invoked the 2-hour rule. Point number 2 is I asked you if you wanted any documents like flight logs to put it in writing. You never did.
Yes, sir, I did, and your staff knows that I did.
No,
we'll submit once again
send me a copy
the information to you. We've done that several times, but we'll be happy to once again send it to you. I think your staff doesn't show that to you.
Well, as I started to say about the emolument clause, and Democrats bringing that up in regard to Qatar, back in March of 2016, they didn't care anything about my bringing up the emolument clause in regard. I wrote to the Obama Justice Department. That letter was based on Secretary Clinton's 2009 to 2013 financial disclosures when she was Secretary of State. Those disclosures showed that her husband participated in at least 62 events with foreign states. Some of those were speaking events with connections to foreign governments. And things were silent about the former Biden administration failure to vet Afghan evacuees. Instead of coming clean, the Biden administration dismissed and failed to answer my oversight request. Not a peep from my colleagues about these massive vetting failures. The Department of Homeland Security Inspector General confirmed these vetting failures. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and A.G. Bondi, thank you for your time before us today. I have found this hearing to be so instructive because it has pointed out to me the lack of caring from my colleagues across the dais when it comes to how the DOJ under Biden was weaponized, how they used this for political attack on their political opponents, and the smugness from some of my colleagues across the dais. I think they enjoyed it. I think they wanted it to continue. And I think that's why they oppose some of the reforms that you are making to actually get people out across the country and to get them working and to have people that are actually finding out
what the FBI and the DOJ did. You look at what happened with Crossfire Hurricane and the way some Democrats tried to blow that up and make it some big issue and all about Donald Trump and the accusations, and of course, they've been proven wrong. You look at what has happened, what we're finding out about Arctic frost, and the way we were surveilled, and the way Senator Graham, Senator Hawley, and I, we don't know what all they got. We don't know who all they tracked. But to tap our phones, to pull that data, for these wireless companies to have allowed them to have that, and for them to use it in their investigations, how disgusting is that? And their attitude and lack of concern about the weaponization of the DOJ. I've had a couple of colleagues who have been so concerned about some bureaucrats at the DOJ and the FBI being fired. You know what? If they did wrong, not only fire them, prosecute them. And my hope is that as we look at what happened with Arctic frost, that there will be a special counsel, that we will do our due diligence, and that those who did this wrong, this illegal activity, absolutely, they need to be prosecuted, and they need to face the full extent of accountability within the law. I made a note of how resistant they are to reform. And in my opinion, what this shows is that they don't want one tier of justice. What they want is two tiers of justice. It was their play box. They could get in there and manipulate and use it to spy on us. So they saw this as something that furthered their political goal. So I am pleased that you are cleaning house. And those who have not served the American people well, fire them. They need to be gone. They need to be gone. Talk for a moment, just a moment, about what you're doing to end the weaponization.
Senator Blackburn, the weaponization against you and your colleagues should greatly concern all of us. It should concern Democrats. It should concern Republicans. Yet, we don't see that. There was a two-tier system of justice under the Biden administration. We're learning that every day. We saw Jack Smith weaponize the Justice Department against Donald Trump. We saw the Biden administration weaponize the entire Justice Department, all of the law enforcement agencies, against Donald Trump, against his family members, against his friends, for years and years. And that weaponization is over. No one is above the law, and there is a one-tier system of justice in this Justice Department. And that's what we will continue to do.
We appreciate that. And, you know, having vice-chaired the president's transition in 2016, as you remember, there was surveillance that took place on the transition and on the transition team. So this is not the first time, it's the second time. And shame be to those that have furthered those lies and what James Comey did to this country, what Christopher Wray allowed to happen to this country. I want to talk to you about Memphis, the Memphis Safe Task Force. And you, President Trump, Director Patel, the work you're doing there is really quite amazing. I had pulled those latest stats, and we had 503 arrests with the FBI task force in July and August. We've added, with your Memphis Safe Task Force, just last week, 321 arrests, 83 firearms that were seized, 7 missing children that were recovered, 28 known gang members have been arrested, and the list continues to grow. We've also gotten over 120 federal indictments. But this is really quite a success story, and I think that cities like Portland and Chicago are missing out by not having this coordinated, focused effort. And the fact that there are 13 federal and state agencies working together to make Memphis safe again. And we are very grateful about that. One of the things that we are working on is to end a cashless bail. We have a very liberal DA in Memphis that has campaigned on avoiding cash bail. And we had a good hearing on this last week. And we have legislation, Representative Stefanik and I have legislation that would end cash bail, end cashless bail in DC, and then also would remove funds from jurisdictions that practice cashless bail. Touch on that and the importance of having cash bail for that accountability, keeping those criminals off the streets.
Yeah, Senator Blackburn, first to Memphis. I was in Memphis, as you know, a few days ago with Secretary Hegseth, and we had about 1,100 officers from at least 13 agencies working hand in hand. Your Memphis police officers care. They want to be out there doing their jobs. And what we said is we have federal law enforcement officers now who have their backs. They were thrilled to have us there. The mayor, Paul Young, is working well with us. Of course, Governor Lee was there. You have been a champion of this. Senator Haggerty has been a champion of this. You both, before I was sworn in as Attorney General, you both brought this problem to my attention. You talked to Director Patel, and Director Patel was on the ground right away in Memphis attempting to make Memphis safe. But we knew we needed so much more than that. He put a huge dent in the problem. But Memphis's crime is through the roof, the highest violent crime rate in the entire country. And that's why we went to Memphis. And Memphis has welcomed us. It's an iconic city. And we want to continue to work with Memphis. And we're going to do that just like we did here in DC. The citizens have been great working with us. Violent crime shouldn't be occurring in any of these cities. And as you said, I don't understand why Chicago, why Portland, why these sanctuary jurisdictions don't want to work with the federal government.
No.
Gangs are rampant. Transnational gangs are rampant in these cities because they're harboring them, no longer under Donald Trump. Whether they want to or not, we are going to come in and make it safe for their citizens, whether these liberal lawmakers want to or not. And you know what I said regarding the DA in Memphis? I said, we're going to protect the Memphis police officers. We're going to take every single case federally that we can, because the DA has cashless bail, it's a revolving door, and no one is being held accountable. Police officers are seeing someone arrested, and they're back out on the streets the next night committing crimes. And Janine Pirro is working on that here in D.C. to change that as well. So thank you for your legislation.
We appreciate that, and the Memphis mayor is doing great. We had a Shelby County official who was trying to dox some of these officers, and she's since taken this tweet down, but she's an elected official. And she goes, attention on Peabody between McLean and Cooper, 4 fed vehicles and a trooper, men in full gear and guns on street. Hashtag pay attention, folks. This is the kind of action that is not called for. I mean, the fact that an elected official would do this, this is why we have legislation that would make it a crime to dox any federal law enforcement official when they are doing their job. And these apps, and Apple and Google say that they've removed these apps, but I tell you what, these law enforcement officers need to be protected. We appreciate that you are doing that. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator.
Evidence.
And to my little girl's favorite senator.
That's it. Absolutely. What a beautiful, precious child. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your insights on this topic. We all want to make certain we're building a strong economy or creating the environment so that you all are participating in building a strong economy. So we thank you for your input. Mr. DeMasi, I want to come to you. IonQ, important to us in Tennessee, and we are looking forward to great things there. Tennessee's a great tech state. Chattanooga is becoming a tech hub, and we're thrilled with what we see happening there. And as we look at what is happening with quantum and hybrid applications and building out a quantum network, we like the fact that Chattanooga is building a commercial quantum network that businesses are going to be able to innovate on. And I have, as I'm working on restarting the quantum initiative here in the Senate, what we're doing is looking at a sandbox, and Senator Lujan and I are doing this, which would be a sandbox for near-term applications and being able to turn these around in 18, 24 months. I'd like for you to talk a little bit about why this is important for innovators to have access to this.
Well, thank you, Senator, for your foresight, wisdom, and leadership on so many quantum bills, both at the federal level and, of course, in the great state of Tennessee. We're proud of our partnership with the Electric Power Board of Tennessee in Chattanooga. And this is, of course, a bit of the world that led not only in the world's broadest and fastest broadband capacity a decade ago, but is, of course, leading once again with quantum computers and quantum networks connected together. The opportunity, both at a state and federal level, nationwide, is to recognize where the ball is going, where the puck is going. And as you correctly identified, the opportunity for value capture is moving, we believe, at the pace that IonQ is leading the quantum computing, networking, and sensing space to very much be about software and applications and how you capture value in solving problems that can never be solved with classical computers using our quantum computers in partnership with the next generation of effectively software engineers who use that hardware to solve problems in record time that otherwise aren't part of the economy. So we're creating a brand new industry, will drive economic growth at the state and nationwide level, and it's being created effectively from scratch, right? There are currently no people, very few people who are able to build applications on our quantum computers. And using our quantum computers and networks, you not only can perform calculations that will create, pharma progress, financial services progress, supply chain progress, predictive maintenance progress, of course, defense and intelligence, and financial services progress. And ultimately, you can do that and compute with our machines and also transmit that data and keep it unhackable and safe. So this is the industry of the future. This is the industry that matters in the 21st century. We obviously need to continue to reauthorize everything we've depended on, in prior years to get to where we are. I think there's a very, very brave future, not just for the great state of Tennessee, but also for our whole country, if we continue to adopt quantum computing, quantum networking, sensing, and realize that the game has now moved on to specific software applications in every single vertical that matters in every state and nationwide.
And I think that is so important as you look at those applications that are in development. And of course, you all have done some great work with Oak Ridge, which is there in Tennessee. And of course, the Frontier, world's fastest computer, has been there in Oak Ridge. And we have a lot of innovation. And then you mentioned your partnership with Chattanooga. Talk for just a moment about why it is so important to have a partnership with one of our national labs, and then partnerships like you have with EPB in Chattanooga in partnerships with working on the Gold Dome, and why we have to have these emerging tech leaders step into those partnerships.
Yeah, well, as you're undoubtedly aware, and Undersecretary Gill at the DOE and I were chatting about a week or two ago, you know, 9 out of 10 dollars spent on R&D are coming from the private sector, but that 1 out of 10 is really important for sparking progress, particularly in early stage projects. Our partnership with ORNL, deeply important in advancing both quantum computing and quantum networking in the great state of Tennessee, but also nationwide. And so the right partnership here is really what I think is creating the ecosystem for our success, honestly. And that's true both at the state level and the federal level. When it comes to broader applications, you know, what makes IonQ a very unique company is we have this quantum platform, quantum computing, quantum networking, quantum sensing in all 4 theaters. We're doing this on land with EPB and a quantum network. We're doing this also up in the heavens. And so Golden Dome is completely relevant to the way we see our mission to extend quantum key distribution, quantum security, and quantum computing in all theaters that matter to both the state and, of course, the federal government. And it really is the industry of the future, right? So this is where the jobs are going to be nationwide and at the state level.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.